Welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ. Welcome to the Tuesday Nighters. Welcome to the book club. It's always a joy to come together on Tuesday nights. I really spend my day looking forward to getting together on Tuesday nights. This our 61st week, and I get tickled when I say this out loud. And that's not Tuesday Nighters. Tuesday Nighters have been together for more than 4 years. But our book club is now into its second year, 61 study sessions together. This is our fourth time we've gone into Romans during this study. The title of this subject is When in Rome, Do as the Romans Should Do, because we find that Paul is always giving them instructions. And often it is pertinent to them. And I think there's a few hints that it was in this particular chapter as well. This is what you've accomplished. I think you knew last week we had a very, very short assignment, only 14 verses, which was not the shortest amount of verses you've read, but 361 words was the shortest assignment you've ever had. So we now are doing manageable reading assignments, and it's creating really lovely conversations. This is what you've done. 244 chapters, 5,940 verses, 160,000 plus words, more than 100 hours of talking, more than 100 hours of studying, even before we get to the conversation. So I just believe that God is so pleased with all that you all are doing. So here we are. We're in this 14th chapter of Romans. It's just a single chapter, only 23 verses and 525 words. Let me roll this through. I didn't know it was going to come. That's like this. So I did a probably a more general overview than I've done before, because the entire chapter really moved me to do that. So he used this chapter, Paul, I shouldn't say he, Paul used this chapter to identify, to clarify, and then to rectify a very common occurrence, not just within the life of believers, but within any human being who interacts. People don't always get along. That's the common occurrence. So he took this chapter to point out and educate the followers that disputes take place kind of anywhere, maybe even in most relationships. He was instructing directly that those who are more mature in their journey with Christ would focus on tolerating specifically those who are less seasoned. He was teaching mutual acceptance, not just to the older, but he was instructing the older to be examples. But he was teaching mutual acceptance, especially for those who may be causing disturbances. And sometimes that's the newer converts. And not just newer, but maybe even weaker in their spiritual walk. It doesn't mean that they're making sinful decisions. It means that they're still grasping to get their legs underneath them. So this freshness that he spoke to can result in coming into even conversations back and forth with a little bit of lack of understanding. And so as they struggle to grasp the entirety of what they've signed up for, if you will, it becomes a challenge. And again, especially for those who may be older. I recall as a young person hearing some of the brothers and sisters talk about someone else who is struggling in their walk with the Lord. And one very lovely, loving sister said to the others involved, said, it's a lot easier to keep someone rather than trying to convert someone. She was pointing out that this person had been converted, and we didn't want to chase this individual away. So I just thought that was such a beautiful way of doing what Paul is doing in this 14th chapter. So the senior saints, if you will, are identified as a stronger brother in one of the verses. It was called to accept the younger, who was called the weaker in this verse. This is not most importantly, not to engage, not to point out that an engagement of morals or ethics, maybe is the best way to say that, but instead he called it doubtful things, opinions, things that there was no firm answer to, not things that were necessarily forbidden, but just things that created question marks, and to be gentle with the others. But I want to again say that's the example he's using. We don't want to paint ourselves into a corner and think that's all Paul was speaking to. He was speaking to all the saints in their dealings with all the saints. He was just using examples with specifics. He's not, again, I said this earlier, he's not addressing morality. That's the key that we have to understand. But again, things that can easily cause judgment amongst us. One example he used, and again, I told you earlier that sometimes with the Romans, he used specifics that at least caused me to smile. So I wasn't surprised when he used food as an example to the Italians, to the Romans. So the Roman believers, some of the Roman believers were vegetarians, while others ate anything and maybe even ate everything. The one who doesn't eat meat, he was pointing out, should not refuse to accept another of God's own. Because we have to remember, because God had accepted them. If God chooses us, who are we not to embrace one another? That's what Paul was saying. Just because of a difference of opinions or a difference of thoughts, we should not let that tear us apart. If one's conviction is true and real and genuine, if you will, then all things are a matter of principles that we take to the Lord. Must never assume, please hear this, because I truly believe this is what Paul was saying indirectly. We must never assume our opinions reign supreme. To remember that all people think differently. And others sharing your pew with you may think differently. Normally, we're deeply convicted people. I say that with honor and with respect. But that can lead to crossing lines of presumption. Might span from, if you will, spiritual convictions to natural mindsets. Example, food, politics, upbringings, and it goes on and on and on and on. But these are the areas that have no defined right and wrong, but we sometimes feel right in our beliefs. And that's where we can stumble and bumble. None of us have ever lived in isolation. What I mean by that is our mindsets are an accumulation of our experiences. And maybe we assume rightness in what we believe. And of that, I really think that's a lovely approach, because we always want to get on the right side of things. But how is it that two in the same pew have difference of opinion? So we're all searching, and maybe still searching. Our understandings are based on many things. Again, we don't live in isolation. And I believe that that's why Paul's saying we can't let these doubtful things tear us apart. But we come to conclusions based on families, friends, cultures, ethnicities, communities. All of these play a part, not one versus, but probably all. And that's why no two people are exactly alike. My family's a little different than someone's beside me, even though we're in the same community. We may share a culture or an ethnicity, but again, I come from a different set of friends than they do. And so all of these are my filters. All of those are theirs. We come to different conclusions. So we have to remember, at some point in our lives, everything shifted from what we knew through a new filter, this new process through Jesus Christ. So now I bring all this old baggage, you bring all your old baggage, and we run it through a new process. Doesn't mean we're going to come to the same conclusions or even the right conclusions, but maybe not the wrong conclusions either. So we give each other room. whether it's old, young, new walk, old walk, been here for a while, haven't been here for a while, from another part of the church to a new part of the church. All of this plays in. So our old natural, impure self is now entangled, if you will, with a new spiritual self. And what we want to do is become spiritually aligned with those sharing a songbook, sharing a Sunday school class, sharing a church, just sharing a branch. But it doesn't mean that we will just easily become naturally aligned. That's what we work on, and that's what we work through. Okay, so as an example, I may suffer through, if you will, because he uses food often, I may suffer through a stalk of unsalted broccoli while you're devouring a delicious steak. And we eat together, and we're peaceful. Different, but the same. No, we might not share the same diets, if you will, but we do share Jesus Christ, and that's where we put our focus. So Paul is writing to the times, if you will, and the environment of the Romans. And so he's being specific. So he used eating as his first example, as I said earlier, food, if you will. But that was only an example of the stuff that can get in the way. And it's more than just food that can get in the way. It's more than just politics that can get in the way. It's more than just where we're from. It's just everything is stuff. He spoke to food, but it's more than that. And this is what Romans 14 is about, and that's why it's so beautiful. So I'm going to try to bring stuff away from the Romans and into our lives, make it a little more relevant for 2024. I wanted to give you a couple examples just to consider. How did we get here? How could we, who all love the Lord, be so different at times? But we are. And this is where tolerance and acceptance plays in. So watch this. Someone asked you to go to a pro baseball game with them. You played baseball or softball, and you love the sport. So imagine what you would think when they asked you to go see a baseball game. Someone else was asked to go see that same game. In their upbringing, the kids who played baseball mocked them, made fun of them, maybe because they had acne or some quirk that was a target to be made fun of. And so the word baseball is a trigger to something negative to them. Both invited simply to a ball game. Completely two different thoughts. Instagram or some form of online comes into your home showing people dancing. One of you sees it in their house, and they grew up in a strict religious household where their parents were harsh in their warnings to them about the sins of dancing. Someone else sees that same video, and they had been on the dance team in their upbringing and met maybe their lifelong friends, all from that dance team. Two people seeing the same video, two completely different processes. Someone asked you if you want a hamburger. I brought it back to food since Paul did that. I thought I'd bring it to this too. Someone asked you if you'd like a hamburger. And you had people in your family who have suffered through colon cancer. And so the minute someone offers you red meat, maybe that's where your mind, and maybe it's a trigger to something very negative. Someone asked someone else if they want a hamburger, and they had grown up without. And so a hamburger represented a monthly celebration. They would go and grab a hamburger because they could only afford it once a month. And so it was a treat to them. Two different people asked the same question. Would you like a hamburger? Two different processes in receiving that. A policeman looks at you as you walk by. And in your house, police always represented safety and protection to you and to yours. Policeman walks by someone else, someone who shares your pew, someone who sings songs right beside you every day. They walk by a policeman and immediately it triggers something to them because the police have always represented fear or even threats to them. Two different, completely different experiences. Different, yet the same. We may not share the same experiences, but again, we share Jesus Christ. So we can't be torn apart by stuff. Paul is a great example to us. And I've come to love him over the last probably 4 or 5 years. He's a great example for multiple reasons, in multiple ways, with multiple purposes. He understood conversion, as he may have been the most challenging convert of all, at least in Jerusalem. And maybe that's why God had to do the converting, just slamming him to the ground. Paul also understood about bringing the past into the present. Maybe that's why God had to use 3 days of a comatose victim to teach him and train him when he was silent, when he had nothing to do but give full attention to God, to get him up to speed for all that he had done. His conversion was a little longer term than maybe any one of ours. So maybe this is why Paul he saw those who were struggling to get forward with their lives, those who were new, and that's why he referenced them. Maybe he wanted to provide a quicker start for them, for these converts, to help them avoid the pains of transition. His a 3-day process, but we also learn later that he was taken up for years in training with the Lord, specifically and directly. His conversion took a little longer than others. I think he wanted to make it easier for those. Romans 14 delivers in every way. Paul must have also understood that mankind often vilifies what they or who they or we don't understand. It's just easier to judge than to accept and tolerate. It's too much work to understand why and how. And Paul understood that. He understood that different people would share the pew. And he wanted to help them to understand and seek to understand. Because he also knew this: if we're unwilling to learn about each other, then we're unwilling to understand each other. And if we're unwilling to understand each other, then we're unwilling to be understanding of each other. Paul, who had been the most intolerant, who had been the most unaccepting terror to the Church of Jesus Christ, was now teaching and now training in love. This was a simple Love 101 course. And this newfound godly love that he had embraced, he was trying to teach others to do the same, and understood that that love is manifested through tolerance and acceptance and patience and understanding. And tonight, I believe those of you who read 14 and will now discuss 14 are also still being taught by Paul in all these areas of love. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can start sharing about Romans 14.